It's been only 6 weeks, but the Trump administration and the GOP-led Congress has already rolled back, delayed, or outright killed dozens of regulations. New York Times counts more than 90, and I want to point out some of the most alarming ones. Congress, they just reversed a rule that basically blocked mentally disabled people from buying guns. Now it's going to be easier for them to get firearms. Then there's Wall Street. Some of the protections aimed at preventing the high-risk trades that helped cause the 2008 financial crisis are under direct attack and are being outright rolled back. But perhaps it's the environment that's most at risk. Rules in place to keep our air and water clean and safe, well, they're getting obliterated. Clean water rule in place for decades. It's getting reviewed with the intention of reducing its scope. Same goes for vehicle emissions, coal mining, oil, gas exploration, and dozens of other industries that have had the greatest impact on the environment. A lot of business groups, lobbyists, and huge companies, they're getting lots of things they've been wanting for years, and that's not expected to end anytime soon. My next guest, he wrote the Times article that spelled all of this out in great detail. Eric Lipton, he's a Washington-based correspondent for the Times, and he's kind enough to give us a few minutes. Eric, thanks for the time.
Thanks for having me.
You know, first off, that soundbite that everybody remembered, we're going to drain the swamp. Well, the one commonality for all the things I mentioned and much more is corporate lobbyists definitely had their voices heard and were instrumental here in every one of the rollbacks I described and more.
It's right. I mean, one of the things that was quite stark for me was to see the different letters that industry groups had written asking for specific repeals of regulations that they did not like. And then often within a matter of days or weeks, there would be an executive order or a letter from the new cabinet secretary in different agencies across the federal government that repealed just the exact rule that the industry had asked to be pulled back, and often with a nod to the request itself. And for example, the Department of Interior invited the National Rifle Association, one of their top executives, to be present when he unveiled the fact that you could now continue to use lead-based ammunition in federal parks. One thing just to note, the Clean Water Rule that you mentioned is a new rule. There has been a Clean Water Act for many years in the United States, but the rule that was at question that is now being rolled back is something that was just recently adopted by the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers. And now that rule is being rolled back, even though after a number of years of effort to try to get it passed.
You know, the one commonality when I read your piece, Eric, was I was just thinking, Trump won in large part because the middle-class guy thought he was getting screwed. And when you look at some of the rollbacks, the ones most directly impacted are going to be in a lot of the red states here and a lot of the middle-class people that are going to be harmed. And if you think about the Michigans, for example, you talked about the environment with the EPA and Flint and the water crisis that we had. It's not just rollbacks, but also EPA, I think they're cutting more than 20% of the staff right now, another 25% in terms of enforcement budget, et cetera. You go up and down the line here financially as well. Look who's looking out for corporate credit card protections, for example. And you can go chapter and verse here. The ones who lose the most with most of these regulations are the middle class folks. Am I right?
The people that are best positioned to benefit from this are stockholders and executives at these corporations that are going to see their compliance costs lowered and their profits rise, and they're going to continue to be able to do business the way that they want it to do business. Now, I mean, there is an open debate, and of course, if you listen to folks in the Trump administration and from the business community, and they would argue that there's so many regulations, there's so much overreach, this is slowing the economy, that is curbing employment, and that all the benefits, will be across the United States, and that there'll be more jobs, more wages, if there are fewer unnecessary regulations. But, the open question is whether or not some of these rules that they're eliminating are going to have consequences for the health, safety, and even the financial well-being of Americans, nationally.
Was there really a giant demand that the mentally ill now need to get access to guns? I don't get the big drive here across the country to make sure 75,000 people apparently are now going to qualify that they were barred but now can get their hands on a gun.
Yeah, again, I mean, just to slightly clarify that one, there is still a prohibition in federal law that if you are severely mentally ill, you're not supposed to be able to buy a gun. What was the rule that was in question was the Social Security Administration was planning on turning over information it has in its system on people who are getting Social Security benefits because they've been designated as disabled because of mental illness. And so the Social Security Administration was going to notify the Justice Department of its entire inventory of people that it considers disabled and mentally ill, and those people then would be banned from buying guns. And so that's approximately 75,000 people a year, and that rule has been nullified because the NRA thought it was unfair and prejudicial that not all of those people were prone to violence. And actually, even the American Civil Liberties Union joined with the NRA and felt that it was too broad of a designation, and that all of those people should not be presumed to have a tendency towards violence. So, these things are a bit more nuanced, but the bottom line is that across the board, we're seeing a historic rollback in federal regulations that's happening very quickly right now, and something that I don't think we're all focusing on as much because we've been more fixated on questions about Russia, than we have on what's actually happening with the federal government so far.
Well, to that end, a lot of people would say the last 45 days have been peripatetic and that, like we follow the shiny objects. But this one, at least, the rollbacks, does have a method to the madness. Steve Bannon has been, and you write about it, he believes and he's advocated for a deconstruction of the administrative state. Polite way of saying, get rid of as much government as possible, right?
Yeah, I mean, Bannon, when he spoke in the Washington area recently at a convention of conservatives, was very explicit. He said that this is a policy that is preconceived and that they actually selected members of the cabinet based on the amount of their zeal towards finding and eliminating federal regulations. And you look at a guy like Scott Pruitt, and he spent his 8 years, nearly as Attorney General in Oklahoma, suing the federal government to try to kill as many regulations as possible. And he's now the head of the EPA. And across all of the cabinet, many of the folks who got into their positions are there simply to try to strike down regulations. And these are the same regulations that the Fortune 500 companies want to eliminate. And we need to watch closely as to the consequences that this might have in terms of the environment, in terms of the health and the safety and the financial security in the United States. This is something we all need to watch closely.
Well, we'll be following it. Eric Lipton, I certainly appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.